Music for me has always been something that was a way to get in touch with an ecstatic state of consciousness. I remember growing up in church hearing Bach organ, and I was really inspired by the incredible ecstasy of that music. Then later on I got into jazz, John Coltrane, Keith Jarrett, modern jazz people. And at some point along the way, I think it was still a teenager, I first heard Indian music. And I was really moved by that music. There was something about it that was very free, yet it was imbibed in a very deep tradition. And I didn't know how they were doing it, because to me it was amazing that these guys would get up and improvise for hours and hours and hours, just seemingly endless streams of ideas, much like some of the great jazz people like John Coltrane, etc. And so I started a deep love of Indian music. But simultaneously, I was also playing jazz and Western classical music. And, but my love for Indian music got so intense that finally, I just packed all my belongings up, put them in a storage unit, and went to India in search of a teacher. And because I realized I couldn't really learn this music in a deep way unless I had a true guru, a music guru. And so I went all over, and I finally came in contact with Hari-Prasad Chaurasia, who is really one of the greatest masters of the North Indian bansuri. That's what this flute is, the North Indian bansuri. And just his whole approach to the instrument, the incredible sound he got, first of all, then the incredible flow of ideas. He's very original, yet he was deeply imbibed in this tradition. So I began a very intensive study with him over the last 15 years. It still continues. And it's been a great sort of source of inspiration. Although simultaneously, I've never stopped playing and loving all kinds of music, whether it's Brazilian music, or jazz, or Western classical, or just wherever there's ecstasy. So I think the music that we play, although it has very strong Indian influences, really reflects a lot of different cultures. And I think the point is not really what music we're playing, but it's getting into that free, creative state of ecstasy is what we're going for.
Well, I grew up playing the drum set, but when I was in university, we had an ethnomusicology program, and they brought this incredible Indian musician to our school. I saw Indian music for the first time, and it turns out that that was Hari-Prasad Chaurasia, who would in the future be John's teacher. Now, keep in mind, I didn't know John at that time, but I heard this Indian concert, and they had accompanying the bansuri, the tabla drums from India, which was the first time I saw it. And it just was so amazing to me that, you know, I was playing the drum set, which is this huge instrument, and of course you have a lot of sound. You're using both your feet and your hands and your sticks, and you can of course get a lot of sound. But this guy with these two tiny drums was producing more sound than I could do on the drum set. So I immediately went out, and there turned out to be the teacher at our university. I started studying tabla, and I studied that for about 4 years. But I also realized that I wasn't going to be a tabla player professionally, starting at that age. And eventually it was too much of a demand to keep the tabla and the drum set and the other instruments I was doing. So I let it go, but I always missed it. And over the years, I've experimented with other hand percussion, and trying to keep the tabla technique going, the rhythms and the patterns that I learned, and the technique, the way they divide the hand into two parts and get this incredible speed and finesse. So eventually I started playing these Udu drums from Nigeria, clay drums that I used that technique on. And I did that for quite a while, but it still didn't quite get the sound I wanted. And I was almost ready to give it up, but somewhere along the line I just picked up a Middle Eastern doumbek. And I just started experimenting with the techniques, the physical motions that I'd already learned, and the rhythmic patterns, and I found that this simple drum could articulate very well a lot of these ideas. So I subsequently went on and studied South Indian percussion as well. And over this period of time, I was traveling outside the country, living outside the country for most of the last 10 years, But every time I kind of came back and was here for a while, I would meet John, and we'd do some concerts, and each time I think I had a different instrument that I was trying to capture this field of tabla and Indian music. And finally, a couple years ago when I came back, it really started to click, and we started having a sound that was really happening, and finally it became time to commit myself to this. So I've come back to live in this country and work with John, and what I've realized is that having been outside the country, and there's so many beautiful cultures and traditional systems that have developed over the years, but in America we really are a melting pot of people and a melting pot of tradition. And instead of trying to identify myself with any one culture and saying I'm playing Indian music or I'm playing Middle Eastern music, it's really healthy for me and feels great to be able to say, hey, I'm just an American who loves world music, and I study a little bit of Latin music, a little bit of African music, Indian music, Middle Eastern, and I bring all that, plus my background in rock and jazz, bring it all to Facing East, which is a group that allows me to really express myself fully.
Music is regarded as a universal language, and I think that, as Ken was saying, I don't orient myself specifically from any one single tradition, but am inspired, as John said, by all music that gives me a certain feeling. It's a feeling of connectedness, and I think that's why people refer to music as a universal language, because it's something that the feeling communicated is something that everyone understands from all cultures. And when I play, and in the context of this group, Facing East, I rely on the feelings that come up and trying to create or open myself in such a way that whatever feelings come up, I allow them to come out through the instrument. Some of that is definitely inspired by specific cultures, such as Indian culture, and a great deal of it certainly comes from what I grew up with, which was popular Western music, more obscure Western music, jazz and all of its eclectic forms as well as its popular forms, acoustic jazz, electric jazz, Brazilian music is very near and dear to my heart. I love the feelings of Brazil. People say that to understand Brazil is a feeling, and it's very evident in the music and the culture and the people. The movement inspired by music, rhythmic movement, is something I've become increasingly interested in, rhythm and various rhythms that come from different cultures. And as a lot of modern bass players have begun to, bass and drums are very, very intimately connected. So emphasizing rhythm in bass is, bass guitar is my favorite instrument, let me say that, because it incorporates all of the essentials in the vocabulary of music, which involve, as I mentioned, rhythm, very percussive, also melody, harmony, the low end holding, sort of defining the harmony, restructuring the harmony, and it's a great expressive melodic vehicle as well. That's the electric bass guitar. This particular instrument has a very, very low range, and it runs a very high range as well, so I get to do everything. And in this group, being the only stringed instrument, the only, well actually, now that John is playing keyboards more, the interplay is vast and varied. But I get to perform many roles playing bass in this group, more than in a traditional context of the role of bass playing. So I get to be very guitaristic, very melodic, very drum-like and rhythmic, and also just exploring the sounds of the instrument. Playing with Facing East is really a bass player's dream. I love it.